Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 3 of Depression Vacation, where we talk about things that should depress you and do depress you. And I'm Hal.
And I'm Shannon.
Nice to see you all, or hear you all. No, we don't do either of those things.
No.
We're the ones who are heard and not seen.
Nice of you to hear us.
Yeah, thank you for hearing us. I feel so heard whenever I'm with you.
Yeah.
Whoever is streaming this podcast from the RSS feed, I still haven't figured out how to set up yet, so.
Cool. We'll get there.
Yeah, we're close, so.
Yes, very close.
We've been doing this podcast for a month, and we only just edited the first 2 episodes.
It's fine.
This week.
It is what it is.
Yeah, there are services you can pay to do all these things for you, but I don't want to pay $20 a month just to host a podcast.
Well, yeah.
I'm like, I will.
Oh, fuck, I did it again. Oh, it's over there, though.
Oh, your phone.
Doesn't matter. It's fine.
Yeah. So, I guess you wanted to talk about relationships this particular episode, right?
Yeah,
Shannon?
we got into it a little bit during the last episode, like in the last couple of minutes or so, and I just feel like there's so much more content there to be had. So.
Oh yeah, relationships are just super complicated in general.
Yeah. And then also I had a big life event this week of getting engaged.
Oh, yay.
We're all shocked. Like, we haven't seen it all over social media.
I was just going to say, I definitely heard this, but I'm just trying to feign as much interest as possible.
Yes,
Although,
thank you.
that was the genuine reaction when I saw you and Ryan got engaged. I'm like, yeah, perfect. Because I forget what discussion we were having, but like it was like there was something of his you didn't go to at one point because you're like, yeah, that's something where he's got to put a ring on it if he wants me to go there. And I'm like, oh, he put a ring on it.
Oh, God, I really can't think of what that was. Shit. It doesn't matter.
I think it was like it might have been when we were shooting the vid jam, and that's why he wasn't there, but you were, or something like that.
No. Okay, so his family, they did a day trip to Racetown Lake, and they like rented a pontoon boat and stuff like that, and I wasn't invited because we're not married. And so I was like, yeah, unfortunately, he's got to put a ring on it before I get to go to those things. So it wasn't that I wouldn't go, it was that like I wasn't invited.
Yeah, parents are like... Was it his parents that were like laid down the law on that one, or was it something?
It wasn't even laid down the law. They were like, we could only have so many people, and you're like on low totem pole of things. And I'm like, that makes sense. I get it. Like, and that's the kind of it's a weird thing because like I am kind of the lowest on the totem pole.
You're just a paramour.
Well, I'm the relationship that's the youngest in the family. So like his younger sister has a boyfriend, but they've been dating for like years. And then like his older brother has a wife, and so like they both come before me. But now we're engaged, so I think that puts me a little bit higher on the totem pole.
Just shoot up a little bit there.
Yeah. It's like your credit score almost.
Yeah, you applied for your new Ryan card, and your score shoots up 60 points, and you can borrow more than $12,000 against his name now.
Yeah. No, it's going to be so cool. I'm really pumped. I'm obviously like, holy shit, I'm engaged, which is a whole new thing for me. It's my first time, hopefully the last time, but you never know. My dad has gone through 2 divorces, so the reactions were my favorite so far. Like my dad, I told him I was getting married, and he was like, oh, good for you. And I was like... And so we had a conversation about it. I was like, Dad, I'm getting married. And he's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, Dad, I'm engaged. Your eldest only daughter is going off and getting married. And he's like, you've been moved out since you were 19. Like, this isn't you. Like, I'm not empty nesting. I already have, the nest is empty, Shannon.
It's so funny because I can picture Brian's exact attitude like this, because he seems to like be very much like that. It's like, yeah, whatever. Sort of.
I mean, like, he's happy.
Yeah,
but
in a very cute way. Like, not to say that's in a bad way, because I love his expressions and reactions to things. But, yeah, he's like, yeah, whatever. You and Ryan, seems like it was going to happen.
Well, and that's what I really appreciate about my dad is that, so, like, a lot of people, so Ryan asked the question, like, do I ask your dad for, like, your hand in marriage? And I was like, if you value your life, you don't.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, that's it's interesting you brought that up, because there's like a huge split in certain sections of my extended family, like cousins, aunts, and uncles, and that, where like some of them are incredibly traditional, where you have to ask the dad first. But like the more I've gone through like dating and relationships, I feel like I would never do that. Even if, and actually maybe even especially if the dad wanted that in that situation, because I don't know. It just reinforces the wrong idea, I think. And also, it's your life. It's not their life.
Right. And so that was like one of the things that I told Ryan. And my dad literally said to me, because I was in another serious relationship before this at one point, that we got into a little bit last time. But he had mentioned, asking my dad for permission to marry me. And I had mentioned that to my dad. And he said, Shannon, if any man is stupid enough to ask me for permission to marry you, I'm not giving it to them because they clearly don't know you or me well enough. And I'm like, you know what? That's totally fair. They obviously don't know me or my family if they ask him for permission to marry me.
It checks out. I'll say that I like that Ryan asked you what you wanted in this situation, because I feel like that's always... well, not always, because I recently dated somebody specifically that did like, I would ask a lot of times, is this okay? Or is this what you want? And the response was kind of like, you should just figure this out on your own, which I hate, because I'm like, I'm going to get things wrong. Wouldn't you rather just like tell me what you're expecting or what you want?
Ladies, men are not mind readers. And they are, not only are they not mind readers, they are incredibly bad at it.
Yeah.
Like, they try, and they're really bad at it. You just kind of have to tell them sometimes.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, too. And, like, I recognize this is a huge weakness of mine, because just usually I guess wrong whenever I'm trying to guess what things happen. Like, a good example of this is the like major relationship that I had ended just recently, like in February. Around Christmas time, like I sort of casually asked her, like, or floated ideas of like, hey, what do you want for Christmas? Like, she was trying to build a front patio, and like, would you like me to buy you like the stones and help you lay them in or something like that? Or do you prefer, I don't know, something else? And she was like, oh, just get me whatever. It'll be fine. And I told her, actually, like, the reason I would ask her is because, like, the previous also long-term relationship I had, I was bad at picking out presents for her, and it became...
like a thing
with her. And so sure enough, like, I got my idea for Christmas for her was to, like, offer to pay for a trip to the beach for her to go to. And she, for a lot of complicated and very valid reasons, that was not the correct thing to propose to her. But I was like, I told you this is like a thing with me. Like, just point me in the direction you'd prefer me to go to. Like, even something as simple as like, do you prefer experience gifts? Do you prefer like normal materialistic gifts?
Yeah.
Those are all helpful.
Yeah. Well, you gotta talk to people. You know, everyone says communication is like key in a relationship. I mean, but it is true, and that's why it is a cliche, is because it is the facts. Sometimes that's how it works with cliches.
Yeah, just the way things go.
Yeah.
In relationship world. But I'm happy to like hear that too, that like you and Ryan are back in that line too, especially since it's been about a year since you had told me that you guys initially broke up too.
Yeah, it actually, so this time last year we were broken up. We broke up, and then I got COVID, and then I dated like a whole other guy all in like 3 months. Well, I want to say it was a little more than a month. I don't recall. Or it might've been 2 months. I don't know. I just tend to block things out that make me sad. So that's the move there.
Okay.
But I mean, it is kind of like almost like serendipitous that this was the time that he chose to propose, because like this time last year he was definitely not in that space.
Yeah.
So I mean, we've definitely had a lot of time to grow as a couple, and I'll be honest, like before like actually getting into this with Ryan, I don't know that I've ever been like ready to marry somebody. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, which is totally fine. Like, I'm 26. Like, it's totally reasonable to not feel that way until that time, you know?
Well, you're like significantly ahead of where I was at 26. Like, until I was like, I want to say like 30, really, I'd only had one longish term relationship, and it was very off and on over a number of years, and it was like not good at all. Like, it was a pretty toxic relationship that were like, it was full of makeups, breakups, and like other things in general over the course of like 4 years. I don't even think I would, it's weird to even classify it as a relationship, because like having been in healthier relationships since then, I'm like, yeah, this probably was not it. But like the entirety of my 20s, like I almost didn't date anybody for that reason. Like, also not just that reason, but like, I don't know, I was working in LA. I was kind of like, I'm going to get my career situated first. And then when the career turned out to be a disaster and I was back in Pennsylvania, it was like triply disappointing. So,
yeah. Well, and it's so, relationships now, I think, are evolving in a way that, you know, I don't think, you know, mankind really expected. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I mean, like with the online dating, and then, I mean, Ryan and I started dating 3 months into the pandemic. And so our first couple of dates were virtual. And then our first in-person date was a socially distanced, like, nature walk. So, like, as a couple, it was months before we had, like, our first restaurant date, like, eating out date. We didn't go see a movie in the movie theaters for the first year or so. I mean, just so many different things that it was an entirely different experience for me in a relationship. And, like, I don't know if that would have been different if the pandemic had not been there. And it's a little weird to think about where I think back, because I lost my job due to the pandemic, and then I got a new job, and the whole reason why Ryan and I even matched on Bumble was because I had gotten the job in Hershey. He was living on Palmyra, and I was swiping at work. Like, that was it. And so, you know, I ask him sometimes, I'm like, do you think that, like, if there had been no pandemic, we would never have met? And he's like, we would have met. I'm like, how would we have met? How would we have done that? Like, think about it. It's weird.
Yeah, I think everything is weird the more you think of it. Like, that's actually the last long-term relationship I had. She had mused a bunch of times as well that, like, if the pandemic hadn't happened, like, there's no way we would have gotten together, just because our social scenes weren't the same. Like, she doesn't actually have much of a social circle. But we also had a friend in common, which was the only reason we actually started dating, because that's the cool thing about the intricacies of modern dating too, is you match with somebody on Bumble. I'm actually a super easy person to find in real life, because how many fucking Hals are there out there?
Fair.
So, like, women usually admit to having, like, researched me beforehand. And if there's friends in common, like, and it's happened with this case, it was a really good friend of mine. And she was like, oh yeah, Hal's a good guy. And then that's how we, like, ended up. The interesting thing, like, this week I went on 2 dates, and they were the first actual dates I've been on since pre-pandemic. Because I never actually the last 2 women I dated both had kids, and you know, that makes it difficult to actually have, like, a real date. Like, you kind of just spend your time together whenever you can. So yeah, like, this week was the first proper date I'd had in, like, 3 years, which was interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, despite having dated people too, I think that makes it even weirder.
Yeah, in some ways, for sure. Excuse me, I had a little burp.
That's why you use the cough button.
Yeah, but it was an emergency.
A burp urgency.
Yeah, but I don't think I actually made any noise. So
no, you were awesome about it. So
it's like, I have reflux too, so it's like, bleh.
Yeah, I'm sure. I know you're not drinking coffee, but coffee always makes it worse for me too.
Yeah. Well, it's acidic, like, it's an apple cider, so it's like, oh, there's no more in there. That's really sad.
Oh, sad, empty Starbucks cup.
Rip.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, it's interesting, too, the journey I've been on in terms of, like, my mental health and relationships. I'd say, like, as I had said in the last episode, like, I was in a position in my life where I was working full time and I was going to school full time. And I didn't really have any time to really get any introspection on the relationship that I was in, because he was at my house the whole time.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. So it was, like, really a really weird situation to be in, because, like, I found myself in this position where, like, I was so busy that I didn't have time to realize that I was in an abusive relationship until, like, things happened that made it incredibly clear to me that I was in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Did I mention in the last episode, like, the first time I started talking about breaking up with him?
No, actually, I got, like, you had mentioned you were in an abusive relationship with this guy, but we kind of just, like, went on from there. So yeah, tell me more about the story that you feel comfortable with. Anyway.
Yeah. So, you know, depending on where this conversation goes, you know, just for a warning of anybody listening, that there might be some content that might be a little triggering. So, you know, warning. I could have used the cough button. I'm getting really bad at that. I'm doing good when, like, I take a drink and I gulp, but every other bodily noise, you're just going to hear it, I guess. I don't know.
That's fine. Bodily noise away.
Anyway, so we had started dating probably at the end of my first semester at Hack. So this was when I was still living at home, and this was my first college relationship. And we met at Hack, and like things progressed really, really quickly. And just over time, like there were definitely red flags. It was so funny because the first time, my dad is a really good judge of character. I need to listen to him more. And I discovered that because like when he first met this guy, my dad really hates it when people like try really hard to impress him. Like he hates like people being fake and like all that stuff. He wants genuineness. He doesn't want anybody to try too hard. He just wants you to act normal. And he knows like when you're trying to bullshit him. So the guy came over. It's the first time he met my dad, and he had texted me on the way, and he was like, "Hey, I want to come in." And I was like, "This is our first date." And he was like, "Yeah, but I want your dad to meet me so that he knows, you know, who you're going out with." And I'm like, I'm an adult person, I'm 18, 19 years old. Like, that's weird. Anyway. So he came in and he was telling my dad that, like, he didn't own a television and that he liked to woodwork and things like that.
Man, you're interesting.
Yeah. So he like left the room, and I said to my dad, and I was like, "Okay, so what do you think?" And he looks at me and he says, "Shannon, he is a hipster. Kill him before he breeds." And I was like, "Oh shit, okay." And then we proceeded to date for 3 years. But so over time, and it became very clear after, like I said, a year and a half into the relationship, he broke up with me. And I was like, well, that's really shitty. And so I there was like a 2-week period where I like then had a bunch of sex. And because like I don't equate relationships to sex, I just like, this is nice that somebody's interested in me and I've just been dumped. Like,
yeah, well, that's another interesting aspect of like modern dating too, is like the more availability of casual sex in that particular situation. Like, I thought about that a lot, like, especially since, like, until the age of, like, 29, I'd only slept with one person. And since then have significantly outpaced what the average number of partners are. Mostly because, like, I don't know, I feel like there's a couple of reasons for that. Like, women are a little bit more sexually liberated now, which is good. And then, you know, dating apps, like, give you more available options with people. And I don't know, just that's another weird intricacy of modern dating, I feel. Yeah, for sure. But and then it also, you can kind of draw comparisons from it too. So, you know, he shows up at my house 2 weeks later and he's like, "I made a huge mistake. Please take me back." And I had said to him, like, "Hey, you know, I'm considering taking you back, but I want you to know that I have been with other people in this time that we've been apart." And he got like pissed. Oh, fuck that. And I was like, dude, you are like, I still took him back and I shouldn't have, but that whole situation was, he got all mad. And I think it was because like he had broken up with me to like trauma bond with me. And it was a whole nasty situation. So, you know, so then I said, you know, after that incident, I was like, okay, after a breakup, never getting back together with an ex. That's the rule now. And then, you know, now fast forward to now where I'm a year later from a breakup and I broke my own rule and now I'm engaged. So, but I think, you know, you can't take one experience and assign it to the rest of your life. Yeah, people are super complicated, and I'm assuming that like Ryan is a much different person than everyone else you've dated because he's the one you're getting engaged to, which is sweet. It's like, it's a kind of, I can definitely like sympathize with people who do want to like take a blanket, because I have been with women that like have been in abusive relationships, have had those problems, and it's very difficult to not like apply the same things that you learned with some of the shittier men with other people you're dating, and it's kind of up to you as a guy, or in your case too, like whoever you're dating, to like sort of break that cycle a little bit. But with like, I like to take things on a person by person basis, so like that's why like I think it's nice that you did that with Ryan, like get together with an ex and it turned out to be a good ex. So
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think they were wildly different situations too, because when Trey and I broke up, Trey was the abusive one, he used that as like a manipulation tactic. But when Ryan and I broke up, it was like him going through something himself and being retrospective into the relationship and knowing that it was getting serious, took a step back. And I don't think he intended it to be a break. I think he really was like, this is not going to work. But, that time apart and then coming back and saying like, these are the reasons why I know I'm a shitty co-host.
Shannon.
I can hold on. Intermission with Hal.
Yes, intermission here on the Depression Vacation podcast. Just letting you know that you can listen to this podcast wherever Hal decides to post it, because that's all Hal has been doing lately, except that he hasn't been posting the other episodes, so the first 3 episodes are going to be totally batched into each other. But we're back for on Depression Vacation, because Shannon has silenced her cell phone. Welcome back, Shannon.
It only took 3 times for me to be like, okay, that's annoying. So, getting back together and in that scenario too, and I think I did this both times, but I didn't let him he showed up at my door, right? Mm-hmm. Roses and whatnot, and was like, I'm so sorry, take me back. This was Ryan. And so,
that's sweet. I like that.
Yeah, it was sweet. But I took a step and I was like, listen, I'm going to invite you into the house. We're going to talk about this because I'm totally interested in getting back together, but there were things that happened during the breakup, in the breakup process that we need to hash out. And I need to know that these things are resolved with you, that you have no hesitations, and go from there. So we had a really mature and honest conversation. I can't say I did as good of a job for the last one, but that's what happens. You learn. And that was a 4-year gap too of emotional maturity and all that other stuff.
Out of curiosity, is Ryan about your age or?
He's a year younger than me.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much almost exactly, because his birthday is June 9th and mine's the 21st.
It's interesting because going back to another thing I was thinking about while you were talking about your dad, his assessment of your boyfriends. One of the first things I remember, when I started following you on Instagram, is you did something with your dad on your story where he reviewed your ex-boyfriends, and I was like, this is hilarious.
Yeah, but going back to my dad, I'm very aware that we do not have a traditional relationship, father-daughter relationship.
Well, you said he was 19 when you were born, right?
Yeah.
So that's super young.
Yeah. And so, and by far from the perfect parent, for sure. There's been a lot from my childhood that we don't have to get into right now, but I'm sure we'll make excellent fodder for later episodes. But to be fair, he was a young man who was taken advantage of by a much older, mentally ill woman, and eventually had to make a really hard choice to do what was best for him, even though his kids were in the mix. And to do those things at younger than what I am now is, you got to give him props for me turning out at least somewhat adjusted. So that being said, we had a really rough go of it until I got into about high school, where I then matured emotionally, and then I was like, oh, it's not entirely all your fault.
No.
And so as we've been older, me and him, we've had a much closer relationship, and we also have kind of a no holds barred kind of relationship in terms of conversation and things that are going on in our lives. He actually got in trouble with an ex-girlfriend once because he had asked me for relationship advice. And it was partly on him because he was screenshotting DMs and he sent them to me, but then he accidentally sent them to her. And I was like, that was a rookie move, Dad. But all in all, my dad and I see each other as people. And, I see him as my dad, but he's definitely not a traditional dad, not in the slightest.
Yeah, it seems like you guys seem to have a nice relationship every time I see you, because Brian seems to be just always very honest with himself and the situation. Obviously, no parent gets everything 100% correct.
Oh, yeah.
But, I don't know. I I like that he's a super supportive dad too. Like I always see him at stand up. I've seen him at a lot of the Vid Jam competitions too. It's yeah, he seems like a good guy.
Yeah, he is. And I think so too that but kind of the crux of his parenting always has been making sure that I knew that my decisions were the most important thing. So he's never explicitly said, I forbid you from seeing that boy, and, or even explicitly insulting them my dad loves to be the smartest guy in the room. And he will tear down anyone and everyone to do it. Mm-hmm. And I have told him that to his face. That is a character flaw that he has. So he does tend to be a little bit condescending, and it can be a little difficult for someone to realize that he's making fun of them. But I've known him long enough where, like, just by the look on his face, I will just look at him and I'll be like, knock it off. Be nice.
This sounds, so maybe I wouldn't like Brian as much as I thought it, because this is the exact same personality trait that one of my least favorite people in the world, who happens to be a former coworker of mine, does. Is another person who desperately just needs to be the smartest person in the room, but also will say incredibly stupid like, that's an interesting thing sometimes about people who perceive themselves to be smarter than everyone else, is you don't challenge your thoughts a lot. And so a lot of, like, this particular person told me during the pandemic when we were talking about, like, oh yeah, all these businesses are going out because they can't work. He's like, if they didn't save up enough money for a 2-week gap, they don't deserve to be in business anymore. And I looked at him, I'm like, you do understand how neoliberal economics, the system that we're in, works, is that you're constantly leveraging your money. Like, everything is kind of rent in this economic system. So actually a 2-week shutdown is catastrophic to any sort of business. Like, he would just say stupid things like this all the time because his thoughts were generally unchecked by people to be the smartest person in the room. And so, like, that's something about intelligence that I feel is that it's not static. Like, you can be very smart at one point in your life, and then if you're not learning and challenging yourself, you gradually become significantly stupider.
Yeah.
I had an old high school football coach that said to me one time that very specifically, it's like, you never stay the same. You either get better or you get worse. And I've applied that to, like, everything in my life. Yeah. Usually I get worse. So
I mean, shout out to my dad. He's really grown over the last few years. And he's only 46. I mean, still kind of a young guy, and he's just like, I appreciate him for who he is, and that's awesome.
He's only like 9 years older than me. That's kind of crazy,
right?
He doesn't feel like
crazy.
He feels like not no offense. He feels older. Doesn't feel like an old dad, but he doesn't feel like he's only 9 years older than me.
Well, and I think that's a trait that I kind of inherited from him, because when a lot of people meet me, they think I'm older than I am. And I think it's like, he also went through some trauma as a kid too. So, us trauma kids, we tend to grow up a little faster than everybody else. So, the best thing about my dad is that I see him as a person. I think we can tend to put our parents on a podium sometimes and, kind of pretend like they had everything right. But the best thing you can recognize about people is that they're people, and you can love them, and sometimes they're going to disappoint you. Sometimes they're going to let you down. But everybody does from time to time. So that's where, like, and this is going to sound really crazy coming from me because, I'm the girl who hasn't spoken to their own mother in 3 years. But that's where, like, a little bit of forgiveness comes into play. But you can give forgiveness if somebody changes. Yeah,
I agree. Forgiveness is yours to give regardless. Like, I forgive people all the time, even if they haven't changed, except in a couple of, like, there are a couple of situations where I just dislike the person so much that I'm like, no, we're not doing this at all. But it's interesting, too, you said about, like, putting your parents on a pedestal, because, like, that kind of was my upbringing a little bit, too. And I feel like everybody is a little bit like that, but, like, I'm not going to get too much into it, but, like, I was talking to somebody about this the other day specifically because, like, the way that we were raised as kids, like, something like an anecdote my sisters and I like to talk about is like, oh yeah, our dad drove us to school every morning. We'd listen to Rush Limbaugh on the radios. He was driving us, and we were in, like, first, third, and fifth grade as we were listening to this person, and it just was perceived as normal. Like, that's what our dad does because he's right about everything and he's on the pedestal. And then, like, it's a very, I think when that happens, it's a very cruel revelation later on that not only were they not infallible, but so horribly, like, fundamentally wrong about so many things.
Yeah.
That I think that's part of the depression that I suffer in life a lot of times is like, I held some of my parents to a higher standard in a lot of cases, and they just eventually did not pass the litmus test. And this is like, I mean, this is a gripe that everybody seems to have with Christianity in general these days, so it's not unique to me. But the gripe is kind of like, they're still super Catholic, and just like every single thing that like the right-wing philosophy espouses is a complete slap to the face of what Jesus actually said in like all these scriptures. And I bring this up pretty regularly, and there's no rebuttal from him about it. Like, very particularly, he was sort of laughing at the whole, like, or guffawing, because that's what people on Fox News do a lot these days, at like the 50 migrants that were sent to Martha's Vineyard when we were having lunch yesterday. I did not take that shit. I told him that was a really shitty thing to do to a bunch of people, and very specifically was like, well, what would Jesus have done in this situation? And the response is sort of like, after a while, it's like, Jesus isn't trying to run a country. And I'm like, this is exactly the stuff that he told you to do. Like, you either do it or you don't. Like, and that's one of my, I had a close friend I worked at Hershey Park with who has become like a very progressive pastor in Philadelphia. Like, he's still very Christian and everything. And he wrote this amazing book that I just finished reading. A quick shout out to Johnny Rashid. It's called Jesus Takes a Side. And I'm not religious at all anymore, because like all of this, like all of the garbage behind it is sort of, I have no need for it. I don't see any of God in any of it. But he wrote a book specifically about like dissecting the things Jesus has said and why they align with social justice initiatives in this country, and sort of like the disconnect between traditional conservatives because they claim they love Jesus, but then do everything possible to go against everything he said in the New Testament. And it's very interesting because he drew parallels to like literally every single thing Jesus had said in the New Testament in all 4 of the books, to like the plight of migrants, for instance, the massive accumulation of wealth and wealth gaps with ultra rich people and things like that. And I thought it was the most incredible book because basically nobody in Christianity is taking this side right now. Like, it's all, you know, especially with a lot of churches in America, it's all kind of just following the money, and the money is in white nationalism. So
yeah, I think I really lucked out in terms of like my dad. Like, we have very similar, if not almost the same, like political views and religious views. We're both atheists. And we're both Democrats. I think in a weird way, I might be a little bit more moderate than he is. Because, I mean, he tends to lean pretty left on most things. And so I appreciate that about my upbringing from my dad. But on the flip side, too, he always raised me to be rational and always raised me to criticize everything and to be, you know, to question things. And that's what I really took away from my childhood in terms of, I mean, but I had to take that away from that because on the flip side, I had my mother. And my mother is what I like to call an equal opportunity believer. So she, over the years, I mean, but it's so complicated. So as the last time I checked, she was a Christian.
Okay.
Last time I checked. As I was growing up, she had a lot more leaning towards like Wicca and paganism and that kind of thing. Okay. And then still had the audacity to take us to church on Sunday mornings.
I mean, the two aren't as mutually exclusive as you might think, just because so much of paganism was like refined into Christianity. Right, absolutely.
But my mom's approach was like, my mom didn't know when to stop in terms of fantasy versus reality.
Yeah.
She no, this is really crazy. So I don't know if I'd ever gotten into this with you about my mom. But as we were growing up, she made us believe that this wasn't the real world.
Oh.
So, you know.
So the Matrix.
Well, kind of. So she made us believe that we actually lived in this fairy tale land known, and she called it the castle. And we actually had like magic powers, and we were a prince and a princess, and she was the queen in this castle. And her and my dad weren't actually divorced because he was still in the castle, and this wasn't the real world, so nothing that happens here is consequential.
Aww.
This
is kind of sad.
It is really sad. And it just got worse over time. So like as we were growing up too, she would have these relationships that she would tell us were real. So at one point she had said that she was dating Gerard Butler.
Wow. What an incredibly era-specific movie star, too.
Yeah. Gerard Butler. Randy Orton from WWE was another one. And
RKO, out of nowhere.
They were having, like, astral relationships in the castle. So, like, their consciousness would come to the castle, and that's where they would have their relationship.
Man, this is like the David Letterman stalker type of stuff going on here.
It's really fucked up, dude. And there was another time, and then there was just, like, little lies, too. Like, oh, I had a conversation with Johnny Depp on the phone. And like just things like that. And later on, she found my stepdad who fed into her delusions. So he had tried to convince us that my dad wasn't my real dad because he had been our father in a past life. And that was like the end all be all. Like we were meant to be his kids.
Is your mom still like this? Or?
Yes.
Oh.
She has been like this. I mean, as long as I've known, and that's why I don't speak to her anymore. I mean, it's just the lies just constantly. And she justifies everything. Like she was engaged at one point before she met my stepdad. And then she met my stepdad and she started cheating on her fiance with my future stepdad. And I found out about it. And I was like, Mom, and I was like 12. I was like, I don't understand. She was like, oh, well, you know how in the castle and when you're a queen, you have a lot of different consorts and lovers and things like that. It's like that, but don't say anything to Joe about it.
That's I mean, I know you know that this is all pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, no, and it like for me because like I lived it, it doesn't like hit really because I'm like, oh yes, this is a thing that happened, totally fine. I mean, there was another. So she was also, I believe, she also had Munchausen's by proxy.
Oh, so she tried to kill you? That
actually, yeah. So
I know that from the X-Files, what Munchausen by proxy is.
Yeah. So when I was you know that story I tell on stage about like my mom told my dad she was already pregnant so he wouldn't have to wear a condom. 100% true. And then when I was born, now my dad doesn't believe that it goes as far as I think it does, but so I get born, right? Cool, me in the life, in the world, totally
Shannon,
awesome.
Yay.
But she was obsessed with breastfeeding.
Okay.
But she wasn't making the nutrients that I needed to survive. I was pronounced failure to thrive. So I was basically starving to death.
No.
And she refused to feed me like formula. She was like obsessed with this and I was dying. And it wasn't until my dad's mom, my grandmother, showed up at their trailer and was like, with armfuls of formula and was like, you feed my goddamn granddaughter right now. And I mean, I think that she wanted me to die for the sympathy. And she's had several miscarriages and other things like that where she made the biggest deal out of all of them. And I know that miscarriage is a very serious thing and it's very sad, but like it was a little insane. And she also claimed to have had an abortion, but the thing with her is I don't know what's real and what's fake.
Yeah.
She had me committed to a children's psychiatric ward when I was 9.
Jeez.
She had said that I had tried to kill myself at 9 years old and then tried to put me on antipsychotics at 9.
There's some, I don't even know what this is at this point. Is this like a projection or like vicarious living in a weird way?
I really don't know.
Because she sounds like she needed to be on the antipsychotics.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, and that's just like a little bit of all the nonsense. Like it's how much time do we have?
We have another 20 minutes.
Oh, cool, awesome. Now that we're talking about this,
yeah, it seems to have ended up being parental talks today.
No, that's totally fine. We're gonna walk into every single one of these having a plan, and then it completely going off the rails, and that's totally fine.
At least there seems to be a consistent theme for every episode, even if it's not the theme that we decided on initially.
Right. Well, and we're talking about like relationships and things like that, and like how trauma can affect your later relationships.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's what they say. They like whatever parent you were most like at odds with is the one that you're looking for in relationships. I can say firmly that's probably the case with me.
I don't think it's the case with me whatsoever.
Oh yeah, because Ryan is not thinking he's living in a castle and has not tried to kill you with his breasts so far. So.
Indeed, yeah. No, so far for sure. I mean, and the other thing is that like. She's also the most irresponsible person I've ever met. So, you know, as we were growing up, on top of all these things, there were times where we were nearly homeless. There were times where I didn't have food to eat, electricity, clean clothes. Like, it was really, really bad.
You are a survivor in every way, shape, and form then. Jeez.
Yeah. And, but it also led me to have some apprehensiveness about then going to therapy when I needed it, because she had used mental health as a manipulation tactic. So she would take us to, I went to the dentist a year ago, and it was the first time at this new dentist, and they were like, okay, where are your dental records? And I was like, I don't have them, because you can't, anything before I like left, you can't find. I don't have any access to any of my doctor's records or anything like that, because I don't even know what doctors I went to.
If any, maybe. Are you sure you went to an actual doctor, or?
Well, I'm pretty sure, but.
Or is it just the physician of the castle?
Well, who knows? But it's just so crazy because, you know, they were taking x-rays of my mouth and they were like, oh, you have some fillings. Do you know when you got these? I'm like, no, I have no idea. I don't know anything about my mouth.
Shannon, you missed out on a golden opportunity here. You totally could have disappeared and just like found any sort of corpse to disguise as your body, because they wouldn't have had dental records to match it.
Oh, yeah. No, that's totally cool. But I mean, and so these are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of like, just the amount of abuse. And so it took me a really long time to realize that these things are not normal. And it took a lot of time too, because I became ostracized because of all these things, because, you know, I'm a cool princess girl who has magic powers. I'm going to tell all my friends, and they all think I'm fucking nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, I was an outcast for the longest time because like I had these weird beliefs, and like, you know, my mom was weird and crazy, and like I didn't realize that these were not normal things.
I can't think of what it is, but there was some story I either read or like movie I watched or something where it was a very similar plot line to this, where like the mom is like raising a single daughter or son and like keeps insisting that they're magic for the most part as like a coping mechanism. And I can't remember what it is, but it feels like a Stephen King book. So
it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, much later on too, like when we really started to butt heads, I mean, she was very upset when I moved out, and I went to go to college and everything like that, and she like tried to get my financial aid taken away. That's like, why would you do? I mean, I can't imagine, like at this point, that's the most sane thing that she's done in this scenario, but like, why would you do something like that? Because she wanted to put me in a position where I'd have to move back in with her.
Yeah, that is a very real thing with a lot of parents. Like in fact, this is something, it's so funny after hearing your story with your mom, like all of my parental things are so trivial. Like it's really like fine points, because like we never wanted for like food, shelter, or anything. We were all taken care of, well loved. There were just other weird things that like were not handled correctly, but that's like every parent. But I found that like a lot of, on a lesser level, that exists with my parents a lot too. Like there's so much providing still going on in some ways that they're like it's mostly just like to keep your kids tied to you, which they don't need, because I would be tied to them anyway, because they're pretty cool people for the most part. But also like I have a friend who like she currently is just temporarily living with her parents as well, and this is the same sort of relationship she has with them, and she has to like set up strict boundaries for exactly that reason, like so that the because her parents, similar to mine, did not teach me real life skills, so we still have to rely on them for certain things like into our 30s. A much lesser example of like your mom taking away your financial.
No, I mean, it's totally like it. I really had to struggle and like I've had to learn things all over again as an adult that I should have been taught when I was a kid.
Yeah. Same.
And it's a very frustrating thing to be a part of. And it's also really, it makes me different than a lot of people. And so when I am interacting with Ryan's family, he has his parents have been married for like 30 years.
He seems like he comes from a more nuclear family.
Oh, he does.
Honestly.
He does. And he has excellent support. I mean, like he had an idyllic childhood. And so it really, like, as you know, of course, like I'm not going to be like, fuck you for being normal. But I mean, it does kind of make me feel like the odd person out. And like, I hear a lot of people say like, my mom's my best friend. And like, I call my mom every day. And like, I don't have that. And it makes me sad.
You have a good relationship, like a really good relationship with your dad, though. So there's always that.
No, because
your dad was not living. Well, you said he was living in the castle in this scenario, right?
Well, yeah, but he got out. Like, I mean, like he was too old to like stick around for that nonsense.
Yeah.
When they were dating, like he was pagan, but this was like, I think once he started really catching on to like all the lies and things like that, it really pushed him out of like the supernatural stuff and more into the atheism. But he also didn't enjoy his childhood growing up in like the fundamentalist church.
Yeah.
He has a lot of stories about like the moment he decided like this isn't for me and this is really sick.
I had a lot of friends when I was in Los Angeles. I had a disproportionate number of like ex-Mormon friends because Utah is so much closer to everywhere else there. And it was interesting because like all of them had the identical experiences too. Like with the Mormon church, they just like didn't really get to live at all. Kind of were living in a bit of a fantasy land, or like I had a friend who described it as it's weird because you're like living in a play where everybody is pretending to be nice to each other all the time. And so like none of them were still Mormon, like into their 20s, like when I worked with them in production and things like that. And we actually went to see the Book of Mormon when it came to town. And I think that they found the jokes funnier than I did. But that's like, it's a bit of an epidemic going around to the country, is like people are dropping out of fundamental churches like crazy.
I think so. What really got me as a kid was going through what I was going through in terms of there was, like I said, there was no line between fantasy and reality. So like everything was fair game. And so, I mean, at one point my mom was an amateur paranormal investigator, and like
that's actually pretty interesting, like a ghost hunter.
Yeah, which then solidified my disbelief in ghosts. And I have a huge beef with amateur paranormal investigators. I actually wrote a college paper on it about the ethics of paranormal investigations. And I mean, the short version of that paper is there isn't any ethics to it. I mean, you've got all these, if you like look up amateur paranormal investigators in the country, there are dozens, like tens of dozens of amateur groups. And you go to look at their background and you've got, these are just hobbyists. These are people who are claiming that they can talk to ghosts or whatever, but most of the time it's not what their actual job is. My mom, I mean, she didn't have official training in paranormal investigating.
I mean, how do you get official training?
Right, but that's the whole thing is like, I mean, if I were to create like the perfect supernatural investigative team, scientists, you know, like that's probably like my top thing is
reading waveforms.
Right. And also, I mean, but the other problem is too, and this is the big beef that I have with why can't I think of their names right now? I talk about them all.
Or if you're gonna mention the Warrens,
The Warrens.
I was also gonna mention them too. Because
my beef is so big, and I'll tell you, it's because there was abuse going on in that house.
Oh yeah.
And that's the big issue, is that these people aren't trained to spot abuse. So these parents are chalking up their kids' injuries and trauma to ghosts that aren't even there and like getting away with it.
Yeah, this was a big thing because like The Conjuring came out and it was such an awesome movie. Everybody loved it.
Oh yeah, I love The Conjuring. Hate the Warrens.
The Warrens were like, and they've sort of been redistributed as weird folk heroes. And there were a couple of people like mentioning, it's like, hey, they were kind of hucksters. But then The Conjuring 2 came out, which was also an excellent movie. But like the actual story behind the Enfield poltergeist was not even a little bit remotely close to the story that they presented there. And it was, like you were saying, one of those situations where there was abuse. The kids were just like going absolutely nuts. And the movie even like the Enfield poltergeist was revealed to be a hoax specifically because they had, I mean, as you probably know too, like they had camera footage of the one girl just tearing things up in the other place. And the movie tried to explain that away as like the ghosts made a deal with her that she had to be caught on camera. And I'm like, man, that's so convoluted. Like,
right. Well, I mean, I love the films. They are so well done. And I love Vera Farmiga. I love Patrick Wilson?
Yeah, Patrick Wilson.
I love them as actors. The source material is so terribly bad, and like, I mean, is just something that I wish more people knew about. There's actually this really great documentary called My Amityville Horror.
Oh yeah, I've seen this.
Yeah, so for anyone listening, if you haven't seen it, check it out.
I may have actually seen this. I think it was on Netflix like 10 years ago, maybe, and I watched it. Yeah,
it was about the youngest son of the Amityville family.
Yeah, he does not have. I think I have watched this.
He does not have a good life.
No.
If we're gonna, I mean, like, you know, I count myself pretty lucky in comparison to this kid.
Elaine Warren only just died recently too, didn't she?
Right. No, that's true. But that was the thing. Like, that really pushed me over the edge too, in the sense that like my mom was going into these houses and saying like, I'm a psychic and all these things, and she would pull me in and be like, Shannon's a psychic too, she can see ghosts. And I'd be like, oh yeah, there's one totally like over there and stuff.
It sounds like a South Park episode playing out. Yeah. It's like, yeah, there's a ghost over there.
Yeah,
like your mom is Randy. And
yeah, basically.
I remember too, like did you ever watch MTV's Fear when you were growing up? This might have been because there's such a huge age gap between us. MTV had this amazing, like when reality TV wasn't really still a thing, like in it was 2000, I want to say. They had a show where they just sent like young people into haunted places with like zany cams, which were a big deal at the time, and other cameras, and they had to investigate hot spots in these supposedly haunted places. And I think it's one of the absolute best shows ever because they're not actual ghost hunters. It's a competition. Like you have to investigate so many spots and complete so many dares to make money. There was one fucking terrifying episode where the entire team quit, and it's still like,
oh wow,
to this day one of the scarier things there. But the reason I was thinking about this is Elaine Warren was hired to actually go in to a lot of these places to compile, like, because they show like a little documentary before every investigation to scare the kids and get their imaginations going. And Elaine Warren was always in every single one. It's like, oh, I feel very bad energy right here. So she was definitely a professional ghost enunciator.
Totally. So the most recent Conjuring universe movie, The Devil Made Me Do It.
I didn't see this one actually. So
okay, I want you to watch it because I have a lot of problems with it. I mean, it's a well done film, but when you consider the real life story behind it, it's in my opinion way worse than like the Amityville situation.
It's so interesting because they haven't done Amityville yet for the Warrens, right? And that was like
they did. That was the.
The Devil Made Me Do It?
No. I thought that was like the first or second movie that was based on the Amityville situation.
The first movie, I don't know what it was based off of, but they teased that they were going to Amityville at the end of the first movie because like, oh, there's somebody in Long Island who needs it. Sort of like I always call it the Joker moment.
Movie, then.
Second movie was the Enfield Poltergeist in England.
Oh. Maybe it was the different Conjuring movie. I could have sworn they covered it.
It was interesting because I didn't, like, again, I haven't seen any Conjurings past number 2, but I always assumed that they were just like not doing Amityville because it's been done so many times. It's kind of like the thing, like, we don't need to see Bruce Wayne's parents die one more time. Like, we understand.
Unless you're a sadist, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's just some guy out there, like, with compilations of Bruce Wayne's parents being murdered.
Yeah, it happens in pretty much it happened even in Joker. Like, we didn't really need to see Bruce Wayne's parents being killed in Joker. We get the idea.
Yeah.
In fact, that was an interesting, like, going aside again, as we only have 5 minutes left. I read a couple of years ago, like, the Batman animated series Bible, because they had a lot of very strict rules about what you were allowed to do on the show and not. And one of the things was no origin stories. Like, we are never showing, like, Batman is Batman. We're just dropping into this universe. We don't need to see Bruce Wayne's parents die again. He's just there. And there were a lot of these, like, very interesting rules that I think framed the story of that TV show better than other TV shows. But I liked the idea of, like, especially since everything is an origin story now, like, sometimes you just drop into that universe that's already established. Like, my favorite vid jam of all time is a movie that Jerry Stevens did for the very first horror vid jam. And it's called Oh Shit. And it is a horror comedy movie, but like a brutal horror comedy movie where the entire plot of the movie is just like these three people running away from this beast in a brewery that keeps, like, killing them in incredibly brutal ways. And it doesn't attempt to have a backstory. It just drops you into these three people running away into a brewery from this beast, and all three being killed in, like, actual horror movie level deaths and then, like, humor at the same time. And I told him that I really appreciated that, like, he didn't try to create a backstory. Like, sometimes just dropping us into a situation is the best way to do a story.
Yeah. I'm excited for VidJam. I tried to register for a team, but it was giving me problems.
You are not the only one. Lots of people have contacted me being like, I need help registering for this. In fact, I had a guy I went to high school with who I haven't really seen in like 20 years message me this morning being like, hey, I'm doing a VidJam of horror, but I can't get the registration going. So yeah, I'll help you with that.
Okay.
I was doing the props actually just this week as well.
I was going to say, is it props again?
Yep.
So I do need to register so that I can get a prop.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, this podcast is not going to be on the air probably before it starts anyway, but you have to register for the prop because like it is very. The only year we didn't do props for the horror VidJam was the COVID, like the really bad COVID year.
Yeah,
because I remember
for Barnaby.
Yeah, Barnaby was. We just assigned like two. There was an outpouring of like things that scare you, which was our prompt, and like we got 100 prompts from people, and then just spun the wheel and assigned two because Barnaby was clowns and bad luck were the two prompts there, and both of them sort of got worked in there.
Yeah.
So
no, I thought so.
But yeah, I'm really stoked for horror VidJam. I think you and I are probably going to work together at some point in addition to your own team.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited to have the best horror VidJam, and maybe the best VidJam I ever did was one where I only worked with 3 people the whole time. Like, it was just me, Jasmine Wright, Suji Cruz, and Gary Limoges. And, like, there was no pressure, really. There was just, like, the 4 of us, and mostly the 3 of us, because Suji was only on the set for 1 day, but, like, doing, like, whatever we thought would be creepy. And then I had, like, 3 days to put it together. So that's kind of what I want to emulate this time, because, like, I feel like the last couple of VidJams you and I did together got big in a hurry. And when you're the only crew member, it's generally hard to wrangle people there.
For sure. Yeah. No, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you do for your... would this be officially your first submission? Or I guess Ryan was the one who did the one before.
Yeah, Ryan did that one. But yeah, this will be my first submission. So
nice.
I'm excited.
It's a good one to start off with because, like, you do have more time.
Yeah.
It can be a curse if you don't manage your time very well. Like, there are tons of people who... like get to Sunday and are still shooting the movie, and I'm like, oh honey, I think the ship has sailed a little bit here. You're probably not going to finish.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward. So far, last I heard, we had 9 registrations.
Cool.
So, and I have like 15 props that I've scrounged from local Goodwill stores.
Nice.
So I'm excited. I got some creepy things. I got some sort of weird things too.
Nice.
Not everything at Goodwill tells a story, unfortunately, but yeah, I think it's going to be a good time.
Perfect.
Do you have anything you want to add for the last like minute and a half or?
No.
Yeah, and from what I understand too, for VidJam, just another shout out, Damian Robinson is going to be hosting this time.
Oh, cool.
It was he was supposed to host horror VidJam last year, but we got a just looking at Shannon sniffing her shoe.
Because I'm not convinced that I don't still smell from the trash can situation. You guys don't need to know about it.
It's okay because I can definitely smell my feet in these sandals as well, and I'm glad there's so much space between us because I'm like, oh,
Do I stink?
You do not stink. I'm saying I stink, or
No,
I can smell myself.
I'm just saying, like, I think it's all in my head. I think that smell is just like haunting me.
Yeah, like skunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that yeah, if you stunk, I wouldn't hang out with you. I wouldn't do a podcast
okay.
with a smelly person.
Okay,
so.
perfect. Well, thank you. I appreciate that because I don't want to be stinky and not know about it.
Me too. That's like the biggest compliment people pay me usually is that I smell well. In fact, I had a film crew in my house just the last couple of weeks because Chris Rupert was shooting a movie there.
Yeah.
And I think it was him who said, he was like, Hal, your house always smells so good. And I'm like, that is really the nicest thing you could say to me because I really don't want my house to smell bad or me smell bad in general.
Yeah.
So I have been the smelly kid. It is not fun.
I think it's just seared into my sinuses or something.
Anyway, this has been Depression Vacation with Hal and Shannon. This was a fun one. We talked about
a lot.
Yeah, mostly parental stuff. I learned a lot about you and why you are like you are.
I've been called amazingly well-adjusted by past therapists.
I actually thought that you were, like, I felt like saying you were well-adjusted too, but like a really good friend of mine, this was with regards to improv, but I feel like it applies to everything artsy. He used to tell me, we're all weirdos, Hal. Well-adjusted people don't do improv. And that definitely applies to stand-up too. Like, well-adjusted people don't do stand-up. And I feel like filmmaking it also applies to, but the filmmakers, like, there are some of them that can look like they're much more put together than other people, but we're all messes deep down on the inside. All right, well, thank you all for listening, and hopefully we'll be back next week-ish with another episode of Depression Vacation. Hopefully they'll be online to stream sometime soon if you feel like listening to Hal and Shannon talking for an hour and 47 seconds. So have a great week, and thank you for taking the trip with us.